The commandlets that start with the verb out allow us to send things various places. We've seen a number of them now: out host, out file, out null, and out printer. There is another one that is worth seeing, and we're going to do a couple of examples to demonstrate why you might use something like out file instead of the file redirect with the greater than symbol. Out grid view is the new one. It produces a spreadsheet-style pop-up window showing the properties or information contained in an object, and if you have a collection, it shows multiple rows in the spreadsheet, one for each object. There is an example slide that we're going to go through and take a look at how these things work. The commandlet get-process is similar to our Unix ps command. It lists the processes running on the machine. It does not list all the processes by default, but it will list quite a few of them. The default output for these processes shows specific information for each process. It shows the number of file handles open, the amount of physical memory, the non-paged physical memory, the working set size, how much CPU time has cumulatively been used by the process ID, and so on. These items that are being shown are properties. There are many more properties in process objects than what are displayed here. This is simply the default output. The output from getProcess is a collection of these process objects, and because there is so much data in them, the default display has a reduced list of properties by default displayed. To see more of them, we can actually tell the getProcess commandlet to show more of them by using parameters, or we can take those objects and send them through a pipeline to a commandlet designed to display more of them. We're going to use for our example the format table command. The output from getProcess is actually already a table. So we're not changing the organization of the output. We're simply going to change which properties are included in our output. When you run format table, you can tell it the list of property names to be displayed. You can use a star to say, show me all the properties. If we do that with our getProcess, take the output collection and pipe it to format table and tell it show us all properties for every object, what we will find is that our output table does not display very well at all. There are far too many items of data to fit in the window we are running, and as a result, everything in the last column is squeezed together into a single column, and most of the data is simply not displayed at all. We can try to improve this by running format table with the -auto size parameter, which as of PowerShell 5 is automatically applied anyway. But we will find that it doesn't really help us, and the reason is our window is simply not wide enough to display everything. The output has improved from the previous one because the auto size display has decided to only show us what actually will fit in the window. But we still have the problem that we aren't seeing all our data. If we take this command and try to send the collection of output objects from format table into a file, thinking we're going to see that output better because a file doesn't actually have a limit on how long lines can be, and then we take a look in the file to see what it produced, what we're going to find out is that it's really no different. The reason being, when we use the redirect, the greater than symbol, what goes in the file is exactly what would have been on the screen. If I make my screen wider, I'll actually get more data it still won't be all the data, but I'll get more of it. And even if I have the window wider and redirect to a file, I'll still only get what would fit in the wider window. So to get all of our output in a useful way, what we really would like to do is run our command to format the table with all of our properties and pipe that to a commandlet out file. And as we mentioned, out file can be preferable to redirect because out file has parameters. We can control how it writes to the file, as opposed to simply letting it write the default, which is the width of our window. We can specify the width parameter to say how many characters long each line in the output file is. And if we make it a nice big number like 3000 and tell it the file to put it into, it will create that file or overwrite it with the data from our format table, regardless of the width of our window, writing that to the file with 3000 characters per line maximum. Then when we look at that file, we'll see that each line is so long that it wraps around and wraps around and wraps around in our window, but all of the data is there. Now, of course, this is still very hard to read and work with. Even if we used a very small font, it wouldn't fit very well. So instead of out file, if all we wanted to do was view this data and actually see all of it, we might instead use the out grid view command. Out grid view does not save the data to a file. It displays it, but it displays it in a scrolling window that is as big as necessary to hold the data sent to it. If we use get process to get our collection of processes, and we send that to out grid view, we're going to get a pop-up window, and the pop-up window will have in it all of our objects. But instead of it just being text, it's a graphical window, which means we have our columns done as spreadsheet style columns. The default sort on the output is to organize the objects by their process name. You'll notice they're alphabetical. But if I wanted to sort them by process ID, I could click on the ID column and it will change the sort. Or I could click on CPU to see how much CPU time is being used and sort them by that. You'll notice that the properties being displayed are the same default properties that getProcess would have displayed in our window. That's because we didn't do anything to tell it how to change the output display. So we still got the default. Out grid view simply displays the output. It doesn't modify it. The list of things that are in here are the list of things that were in the default display output. If we had wanted to see all of the data, we would have needed to put a command after getProcess, like our format table, to produce all of our properties in the output before sending it to out grid view. I did give you on the slide a different example of another command that allows you to have all the properties included. It does it in a different way than format table. But for our purposes, it's simply a good example that there's more than one way to do these things. Select star is a command we can use to say, make sure the output objects include every property. When it does this, it turns them all into text, very much like format table. Now when we get our grid view window, we can find that the lines are much longer, and it put a horizontal scroll bar on it for us so that we can actually see the text representation of all of the properties that are in those process objects. This lets us do lots more than we could before. For example, now we could sort our processes by when they started, by choosing to sort on the start time property. We could choose to sort them on all kinds of things that weren't even visible to us before. Lots and lots of the properties that are displayed in this table, now that we can actually see it, you'll notice have a funny looking name. Looks a little bit like a domain name. What it actually is a data type name. The one the mouse currently points at is system.diagnostics.processModule. What it's trying to tell us here, since it's not the actual data that is contained in the property, it's telling us that the object contained in the property does not have a nice, simple display format like a number or string. It's a more complex object or collection of objects, which you can get when you have the data type name followed by a representation in parentheses, and if it has ... the ellipses on the end, that means it's a collection of objects, such as the one in this column, which has ... on the end, meaning there's a collection of system diagnostic process modules in this one property for each process. So even out grid view still isn't going to show us all possible data contained within an object, because if an object's property happens to contain an object or collection too complex to fit in a spreadsheet cell, you won't see it here. You'll just see the process types instead. But it's still a whole lot more useful than trying to deal with it on the screen. So out grid view can be very, very helpful.